So, hello everybody, and welcome to our session for the Bode Electrons Conference Symposium. We're delighted to be speaking to all of you. You're joining a session on the Indigenous Music Technologies Working Group funded by the NIHSS, which we all represent. And we'll be chatting today about some of the issues in our project that we're kind of looking at, so questions of Indigenous music technologies and where that term kind of comes from and what we're trying to do in our project. So our panel discussion will mainly be focusing on those things. By way of introduction, I guess it's important to say that this working group project was sort of born out of the sort of realization that as much as we're sort of advancing with discussions around digital technologies in music, we often sort of neglect to think about the existing music technologies that we already have in South Africa, Southern Africa, but also in the global South, I think more generally. So our working group really is kind of asking this question around what's the place of thinking about various machines for making music in Southern Africa from a technological kind of perspective. And I mean, to go a little bit further back, this project, I guess, also comes from a lot of the collaborations that we've been a part of between sort of Indigenous music practitioners and sort of digital media producers and composers in various kind of guises. And so I think we're thinking a lot around the sort of tensions between sort of what it used to be thought of as quite traditional modes of making music and slightly more kind of and slightly problematically framed as kind of progressive modern ways of making music, and really thinking about these tensions between sort of tradition and modernity, but also between digital and analog, and many other kind of concerns. We're currently sitting in the International Library for African Music at Rhodes University, which has been the site for many of our meetings for this working group, and we're delighted that ILAM is hosting us, and we are generally feeling quite welcomed and lovely. So before we launch into the discussion, I thought we could just go along the row and introduce ourselves very briefly. My name is Dr. William Fourie, and I'm a musicologist, so I'm a little bit out of place here, but I'm interested in kind of questions of technology more broadly. Mpho.
Mpho Molikeng. I'm a musician.
Good.
Okay. I'm Dr. Cara Stacey. I'm a lecturer at Northwest University in African music, and I also play piano and some Southern African indigenous instruments as well.
Okay. I'm Sibusiso Ncanywa. I am a master's student, second year. Interested in sound technology and choralism and identity. Yeah, that's me.
Thandeka Mfinyongo. I am a musician, first year PhD in ethnomusicology.
And I'm Madiba, and I work for the International Library of African Music. I also do teach instrumental music studies.
Wonderful. And together we are a very eclectic band of folks thinking about music technologies from compositional perspectives, from performance perspectives, from sort of digital innovation perspectives, from sound technology all the way through to building of instruments and so on. So very kind of diverse interests around the question of what might indigenous music technologies be. It's a term that we're still kind of grappling with, and grappling with some of the tensions around that. And I thought perhaps as a kind of opening question, what might be quite nice is if actually we think a little bit about what technology means to us. Where does technology sit in our lives, and music technologies perhaps more specifically, and how we kind of engage with these. So I don't know if somebody wants to jump in on that point. Perhaps Mpho, yeah.
This is it's a subject that has been close to my heart for a long time. I believe that music technology is an ever-evolving subject and a practice, you know, because a lot of the instrument, whether indigenous, classical, or all over the world, all the instruments have a lot of them started somewhere, you know, and as people think in terms of how can we better this instrument, then it moves from one phase to the next, and others say, no, we don't like a new model, we stuck here, and then that one gets a new name, you know. And sometimes because of migration, people, when we move from one city or one country to the other, we're not only taking ourselves, we take everything we are. That involves food, fashion, and music is a very, very big part of it, and dance, you know. So the technology, it's basically on how people want to, how they think about their music and musical instruments at that time. But then now we are faced with many other challenges, like because now we have entered into a digital age, whereby now those who are in that space are actually challenging those who are in indigenous practices. Now, at some point, we have to come together and then come up with a way of in which we all are going to coexist.
Absolutely. I mean, that sense of coexistence through technology almost being super important. Thandeka, I want to kind of throw it to you a little bit. Mpho spoke about technology as practice, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how that features in your career as a performing musician. You know?
It's a big part of it. Something that personally that I've also had, problems with or questions about. So it's part of performance, because what he's saying about the instrument itself, like evolving with time. The instrument that I play, for example, uwadi, it's a calabash instrument, and before it didn't have a tuning peg, and that's technology on its own to sort of suit the time that we are in, that it's able to play with other instruments, which was also like it's a good thing. But then I was personally like, how do I reconcile the technology and sort of trying to preserve the culture of the instrument or what the instrument it represents? But it's a really big part of performance. Like it's very important, and I mean microphones and miking and all these other things that come with it. It's a problem that I don't know how we going to solve or resolve. So yeah.
I'm going to throw it now to Elijah as somebody who works in an archive, who's constantly facing this kind of duality of preservation and digital innovation, like working between those two things. Elijah, perhaps you have some thoughts on that sort of tension in technology.
Yeah, well, first, technology, the way I view it in the studio, is more about capturing that sound. Of course, they're changing, like Thandeka said, a new thing comes in and they're now using a tuning peg, so on. But for me, it's looking at taking the snapshot of that particular time, and then be able to have a point of reference also, as time goes on. Because as mentioned by Mpho, every time, things change into certain technology changes as time goes. So to be able to capture that in different times, that's also one important thing that I'm more interested in. Yeah.
And of course, through that process of capturing, you're also using a form of technology to capture technology. So we have all these various kind of layers of technology. Sibusiso, I don't know, as a sound engineer, how you think about this sort of tension between preservation and something, because you deal a lot with sort of digital cutting edge, I guess. So I don't know, do you sense that there's a tension between preservation and modernization in some of the technologies that you're dealing with?
In what I'm dealing with, not necessarily, but it's an interest I have in a general view of what I'm working with, which is choral music, and how choral music relates to the technology we use today, and how then that tension between technology and choral music, and how that technology then preserves the music I'm working with. So it's something that's there, but I haven't paid much attention to it as of yet. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Cara, I wonder, many of us are composers on this panel, but as a composer kind of dealing often in quite experimental idioms, where does technology sit for you in this kind of discussion? Does it facilitate the experimental? Does it perhaps at times hamper the experimental?
Yeah, I guess both. I guess both. I think, a lot of my research work has been trying to dissolve some of these historical boundaries between like ideas around tradition and modernity and innovation. I guess that's something I'm interested in, innovation, whether that comes in like organological forms or to do with different technology being integrated into your practice, or also what you can make when you're in studio, where you're dealing with a whole lot of different technologies that are facilitating totally different acoustical potential that you may not have in a live space or playing for other people. So I guess my work in Eswatini was a lot looking at that. What innovation, as Mpho saying, what innovation was kind of already there and was being overlooked because people were looking at musicians as kind of elderly musicians, not necessarily maintaining traditions, rather than seeing all the very personal kind of innovations or styles that were kind of developing. So my research work, that's kind of where my interest has really been, not only maybe seeing a direct line between people who have previously been seen as kind of culture bearers, elderly people holding the tradition together, and then also, and their use of technology, and then linking that to other contemporary musicians who maybe are a younger generation who are using technologies in a whole lot of different ways. In terms of like allowing more stuff to happen, I think just one example in my musical life is just from being in studio, playing really, really quiet instruments and being in a space where you can really amplify those sounds in a way that you can't. You may experience as a performer playing for yourself, but as soon as you're playing for other people, you lose a whole lot of that detail, and that's kind of allowed for other compositional possibilities because of just because of the space and the microphones and how that works, that process.
Mpho, do you feel similar about those different kind of compositional and performance spaces and what our technologies, around microphones and stuff like that?
Yeah. I think we're aware of our fair share, because it's a lot of times, like Cara says, you find that in your own space, this is what you come up with. Then you gotta have to go out there and share with the people. And sometimes, I think one of the challenges we have is with a lot of sound engineers in concerts and festivals. You find that, well, there are people who are used to your classical instruments, like classic guitar, they know that they just jack to jack it, then it's done. They just do levels. So here, when we're talking indigenous instruments, it's a whole new monster altogether. Because sometimes then now, yes, you are jack to jack connected, but then the levels now have to be readjusted altogether, even after sound check. Once the weather changes, the sound changes as well. And some other instruments really are terrible with weather, because there are those that even the slightest of rain outside affects it inside. You know? So we are now also starting to say, okay, as we compose, we have to think about some music that do not have to rely heavily on the weather. So now we are starting to say, maybe we have to think in terms of how do we make these instruments. Then we start thinking about plastic. But then we also now have a challenge because our sound becomes so plasticky.
Yeah. Indeed. I mean, Thandeka, also as a performing musician, you've probably encountered this issue around the sort of clashes of technology, perhaps, on a concert stage. I mean, maybe you can relay some of your experiences.
Definitely. I mean, and again, like when the instrument, it's not just a string. There's overtones coming from the calabash. There's like stuff that's coming there, like the music. So, when you're on stage, it's either the microphone will capture the string, but what is happening on the calabash, the overtones, is going to be lost because the sound engineers are not really trained, if I may put it like that, to how to mic these things. And I don't know if maybe in some time in our lives we'll have like that included, in when people are learning sound, then the indigenous instruments be included in that, like how do we mic, like finding a solution of miking them, because it's, as a musician, it's frustrating because the sound that is supposed to come up. Like what Cara was saying, the stuff that you hear in your own house, even when you're not mic'd, when I play wadi, like the stuff that just comes out. And by the time I have to go to perform, that's all gone because they do not know how to mic it. And I sort of now have to settle and be like, okay, put everything down, like just give me a bassy sound, that's all I'm gonna get. But the overtones are not there because it's also annoying to just hear the string cling, 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 without that. So you just settle for, just put everything low, no high frequency, no high pitch, just everything low so that we can at least hear the bassy sound. So it's that those compromises and sacrifices that we have to do, and it doesn't really say to the stuff, to the music or the instrument that, so hopefully in the future we'll,
Sibusiso, as reverting to the sound engineer in the room, who's sound engineer has received quite bad rap here. But, I mean, do you see a future in which these kind of reconciliations between indigenous music and live performance perhaps are possible? If you were to ideally design a sound technology curriculum, is that something that you'd think about?
Right now, yes, because I'm exposed to this form of knowledge and experiences. But if I wasn't exposed to this, I wouldn't have. Was my own teaching or lecturing was most on rock music, and that's it. How to mic up drums, how to mic up a piano, and it was exclusively Western. And if I were to be on a live stage right now, and then a performer of the ORT comes and says, please mic me, that would be a monster as opposed to
Elijah, as a fellow sound engineer, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I don't think it's possible to include many of these instruments when you're teaching sound. You could teach about uhadi, but then there's Mpho, then there's this instrument, so on. But I think what's people who are into sound engineering should learn is to do some kind of research on their own. That, I'm going to be doing sound for a Hardy player. How does a Hardy sound like? Because I think for you to do a good sound for a show, for an instrument, you have to know how does this instrument sound? What am I expecting? When I put a microphone there, what is expected to come out? Because if you can put a microphone, and when they hit there, we hear the string, and you think we are good, because you don't know that there's issue of harmonics and overtones and all that. So if you've taken some time to learn about the instruments that you're going to be doing sound for, you know what to expect. You can also, these days we are lucky, we've got the internet, you can look up and see, this thing, they put the microphone here, so on. I mean, even when you're doing classical instrument, if you're recording a flute and you just put the microphone right there in front of the mouth, you get the air, and it's not so good. So just that thing of you taking your time, learning a little bit about the instrument you're going to be doing sound for, it's already like a good step towards being able to work together with musicians who play instruments that you're not used to, that you may not be taught about in the class.
Absolutely, and I mean it also triggers kind of thinking around the ways in which more digital technologies become responsive, perhaps, to indigenous modes of music making. And I mean, we've spoken at times in this project about some of the restrictions around things like digital audio workstations being quite, when it's not critically approached with that kind of mindset of knowing what's coming up as an engineer, then actually the thing that we fall back onto is often a kind of Western knowledge, right? We kind of think that it's going to be like a rock band, or this is going to be like a classical concert. Cara, I wonder if you might jump in here and sort of perhaps think about ways in which you'd like to see technology, digital technologies perhaps, being a little bit more responsive to indigenous musics.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine now because you get used to workarounds. Yeah. So it's a little bit difficult. You either have to, find your own kind of workaround, or often I just ignore some of the presets, just pretend I'm in some other kind of universe where I don't need like any kind of tempo or anything, But so I think there's quite a bit, and I guess it really requires. It can't only fall on musicians. There has to be some kind of conversation, I think, and I think that's what we've kind of drawn from quite a few of our conversations. It's like it's really useful to speak to other people with their own specialisms in all aspects, like in studio, on stage, in live sound, different kinds of ensembles, different kinds of instruments, so that we can kind of address some of these things. So I don't know, I think because I'm MacGyver everything, I kind of can't really think of anything off the top of my head, but I think we are seeing through these conversations like all the ways in which things are actually limited that maybe I'm also not familiar with, that Thandeka points out, or Mpho points, our different experiences show how we've had to be creative to kind of survive live sound as indigenous instrument players, or be able to record different kinds of projects. Yeah,
certainly. And I think there is that kind of DIY, almost MacGyvering kind of sense around technology. I think sometimes we idealize technology to think that it's always going to just be there to support us, but often we're kind of grappling with technology. And I don't know, Mpho, whether you've had a similar kind of experience of kind of grappling with technology, making it your own,
in the beginning, when one was starting out, obviously there was a need to move with, because now you were no longer playing for yourself. Once you start going out there to share, you grow in that one, saying, now I have to share for a bigger crowd for a very, very soft instrument requires some miking of some sort. Then when the sound engineer realizes, oh, it works like just requires a Vox mic, just place it here. Sometimes only to find that as you are striking your instrument, you knock out, there's a microphone that's supposed to help you, So, but then we moved, and I think for one instrument that I first bought the first pickup, I think it was like 2003. For that instrument now I have bought like the 7th pickup. This is okay. That one worked. It still works today, but it worked good then. But then I realized, okay, the technology is improving, and also we need new ways, because it was missing other sounds, even if it's just vibrations. But now you have to get a pickup that can pick up the whole instrument, not just some parts of it, because it is only when you play an instrument that you know what you're expecting to hear. And then it is through those experiences of you rehearsing in your own space, either with your band or by yourself, that this is what I want to share with the people. So, but if you go out there, then it's not coming out. One, it knocks off your confidence. Now you end up MacGyvering around it. Just so you can, okay, now I have to do what I'm supposed to do. Just give them a performance. But it's no longer what you have prepared. But should we have both the engineers, actually everyone involved in that one single performance, saying maybe we really have a thorough conversation as to, we have never mic'd this. We know that you are coming, but then how do we go about it? Sometimes even if they can just ask, we know that they know what they are doing. But if they've never worked with such, it's always best to even ask, what do you prefer? Yeah, it's no longer like just me giving them a technical right, and then they just follow it. It's easy maybe with rock bands, but with us, even just the venue plays a very, very important role. Just those acoustics.
Is already.
I think you raised a really good point, which I'm sure we can all relate to, which is how demotivating it can be. To either have all the sound engineers trying to patch you with every possible thing, or no, I've got this other solution, I've got that, instead of just saying, okay, what do you usually do? What works? What gear do you have? Okay, I can tell you now, this is going to work, that's not going to work. Let's just try for this, But that thing of, especially if you're playing a quiet instrument, you already know it's quiet, you have pressure to bring everyone in to listen, which even when you're well amplified, it can be quite intimidating to know that you can hold the space like that. But then now there's sound problems, either no one can hear anything, or they're not hearing the right kind of sound, or there's like tremendous feedback, which I think we've all experienced. All of these things there's a magic that comes from playing all instruments, but maybe some of these quiet ones in particular, which you kind of you really have to hold that space, and you can lose it really quickly if you don't feel free enough to move, or, you can't hear yourself well, or that it's not quite the instrument sounding its best.
And maybe also, I think the other thing, when you don't have your own pickup or mic that you trust, sound engineers, obviously, they bring maybe a mic stand and a microphone. So now it restricts you. You're no longer as free as you would be if you didn't require all that, So now your performance also goes down, because now you always want to be heard, So these are the challenges that we always come across.
Elijah, I'm wondering whether you've experienced some of this as sound engineer at ILAM, perhaps in other kind of settings where you've perhaps taken technology to people to record them, and how various people have responded to technology that you might have worked with here at ILAM? I mean, does technology always produce just a kind of wonderful thing for capturing that kind of moment in history, or is there a more difficult relationship sometimes between people whose sounds occupy ILAM and the technologies that you're sort of putting in front of them?
Yes, it varies from one person to the other. One, when you come with a microphone and a camera like that, and you put in front of a person, the person start feeling like, oh, now I'm supposed to, act this way, do things like that. So it changes the whole. Some people now they sort of nervous and they switch off, and what you could find from them is not exactly what they're about. So it can be challenging to do it, and so it works out a little bit better if you've got different kind of gadgets that you're using that are not like in your face. I'm recording, gonna be on TV or whatever, but also how you relate to the people that you're going to record is very, very important, because what you're trying to do is record the best thing you can get, but on the other hand, you need to deal with the person so that they, in a way, forget that you are recording them, so that they give you something good. So that one is always dependent on where you're recording it, as this like a nervous kind of person, or the person who just has this energy that is, so it can be challenging in that way. Yeah.
And that reminds me of a discussion that we've had a few times about technologies kind of becoming very visible and at times becoming very invisible. So often when we forget that we're actually dealing with technology is when technology kind of drifts into the background and actually does its own job, does the job that it's supposed to be doing, kind of becomes quite invisible. But there's also something quite challenging around that at times, because as soon as technology becomes invisible, we sort of stop asking questions around it, right? And Sibusiso, I mean, you're somebody who's interested in a little bit around the politics of technology. I mean, do you get the sense that when we stop thinking about technology that we run into problems, or, should technology be made visible, made slightly more politicized? I don't know.
I think it should be made visible, and you should think about it and think of how it should be made visible. Who does it serve when it's made visible? Or we could make it visible, but then it doesn't serve you. It, instead of it making your life easy, it makes it even harder. But I think making it visible and also making sure that it serves you, or you have a mutually beneficial relationship between you and the technology.
No, certainly. I think that sense of mutually beneficial, because I mean, sometimes we just think technology is mutually beneficial, but then actually it's coming with all this other encoded history and baggage and stuff like that, and sometimes that becomes a little bit more tricky.
Sometimes when we do research, we're told try and record as much as you can. And you find that at the time when people know this recording is off, that's the time when you get so much information right there. So maybe, in some places it works for you if for you it's visible, it's there, but for the other person, not that you are hiding it from the person. You can tell them you're recording so on, but there's a thing about seeing a camera in front of you, or a microphone in front of you, or I'm being recorded. but if it's just there, the person doesn't really see it like that. They relax a bit more, and you get more out of that sometimes. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, because we've spoken also quite a lot about the ways in which we learn to play instruments in this workshop. And a discussion that actually came up a little bit earlier today was about how the uhadi for somebody like Marusini almost becomes kind of invisible in the process of learning music, because the point is to learn the music, not to learn to play the instrument, right? And maybe what we're speaking about here is a slightly similar thing, where you don't want this thing to become, this technology, this tool almost, to become the focus, the fixation, all that type of stuff, that we're actually trying to get beyond that in some kind of way. And I don't know, Cara, perhaps, thinking about African music practice as somebody who practices many instruments, where does the technology sit in this kind of continuum between performer, tool, musical product? Like, how do you negotiate that kind of lineage?
Yeah, I think it depends. In a live performance situation, it kind of depends on how you're feeling, because sometimes you enter some kind of flow state, and then it's not irrelevant what you play, but you kind of the technicalities of the instrument are made much more invisible, or not you're in a moment of flow in creating music and receiving it and creating and receiving. But I think there is, also in my teaching, there's something to be said for people having some technical mastery of something. So I think we can sometimes glamorize things, and they can be kind of seen as very spiritual or kind of completely subconscious, and that's the ideal for certain. But I think sometimes in an educational space, you do actually need people to practice and make sure they can play the instrument as well, which is anyway, just like with any kind of craft or any art, you spend a good amount of time doing that, hopefully with a very positive, open flow state anyway. But I think sometimes the flip side of that is that people can feel like there's less skill involved sometimes, which there isn't with many of these instruments, some of which are the hardest things you can ever try to play. However simple the technology may look in some cases. There's one particular instrument I have in mind when I think of that. But I think it's just in that way, it's kind of like any musical experience. You want to be at that point with your craft that you are so comfortable, you can be on stage and you enter that flow state, but it's not always possible, especially if you're having some technical challenges. Then that really disrupts that feeling and your relationship with the music in that moment.
Absolutely. And I want to speak about the kind of elephant in the room instrument here, which really just contradicts everything that we say, which is the lesiba, which is an instrument that we paid quite a lot of attention to on this project. Mpho, as being a virtuoso lesiba player, we spent a whole workshop, kind of just a whole weekend, focused on the lesiba as one of these sort of recalcitrant technologies, which, yes, you want to get to the point of actually making music on this instrument because the sound is so incredible, but you spend hours and hours trying to get around the mechanics of it, and you just cannot produce it. Well, I couldn't produce it. Sibusiso was a natural. He got a few proofs out there, like a real pro after about 3 hours of trying. But let's talk about that, because I think that instrument for me really asks really difficult questions around how we understand technology, because it's a deceptively easy in construction instrument. It's very simple construction. But at the same time, it is not an easy instrument by any stretch of the imagination. I wanted to, Paul, maybe you can speak a little bit to the lesiba as this kind of instrument that's both really simple and really, really difficult.
Lesiba, it's one instrument that before I can even say a lot about it, I always ask myself, the first person who woke up and then said, I'm gonna make the most difficult instrument today, because nothing says a musical instrument about it, and nothing says difficult to play about it. Yeah, and it is only when now you are confronted with, and now you have to produce a sound out of, then you get to realize it is actually the most difficult instrument, as opposed to any other. I'll make an example with a drum. The first time you see a drum, you slap it, then a sound comes off. It is only later on when you can start coordinating your hands, and then with rhythm, then you get to realize I can actually play this instrument. But then with Lisiba, it tests everything you are and you have, your patience. Your treatment, it tests everything, yeah, and you'll still come short, with the results. And there are so many times in my life when I really wanted to throw it away. And to tell you the honest truth, it is yes, I did play some other instruments like your trumpet before. And then a drum, and then my other instrument, my instrument when I really started taking indigenous instruments serious was Lisiba. But because I couldn't play it, people started telling me, if you can try this, you'll get it. After 6 weeks, I've got it. I'm back on to Lisiba. And I think that's how I learned over 100 instruments, because I wanted to know this one, and it wasn't budging, and then I got to learn a lot. So I can say maybe the instrument, there are a few things about the mechanics of it, of which if we can jump that hurdle, I believe some people would be able to start playing the instrument.
Definitely.
Yeah, and those mechanics, it's on how you just place your lips on the quill, and then and the breathing technique. If you can just get up over that hurdle, the instrument.
Seems like a small hurdle, but that's the entire instrument. You just have the quill. That's basically. But I mean, you raise a really important point around sort of accessibility around indigenous instruments, and often we're sort of left to our own devices, excuse the pun, when we're sort of thinking about the innovation of indigenous instruments, because there aren't massive multinational instrument making companies that are sort of driving innovation in this field. This is left to the practitioners to sort of develop. And I think that's something that's really come out in our discussions around technology, is just how personal technology is. Technology is a highly kind of subjective thing. It sits in our bodies, against our bodies. We are confronting it. It helps us. It is our voice, but it's also in hand. It's it's all this kind of terminology around it. So I guess to wrap up our discussion at this point, really just perhaps some kind of concluding thoughts on perhaps where the discussion of music, indigenous music technologies might be going. And I thought perhaps just if anybody has ideas on what you kind of hope to see in this development of this field or something like that, I don't know. Elijah?
Well, I think the more the instruments are played, the better. Because, imagine I'm talking now from a sound engineer point of view. If I'm a sound engineer, I go to this festival and they play Yohadi. I go to another one, they play Yohadi. I will start taking it serious also, because I see more of this instrument, and I want to be known as a person who can mic this instrument and make help with getting the good sound out of it. And so what happens is maybe you see it once and you may not see it again until, I don't know, after a long time. So you don't see that it is an important instrument that you need to pay attention to. So if they are played, more like not just uhadi, but indigenous instruments, you see it there, you see it there. You will also start, tuning mind to those kind of instruments. I need to learn more about these instruments, how the mechanics, everything about them, so that I can be able to work with them better.
It reminds me of something that Thandeka, I think, actually said in our first workshop, this idea of technology being in hand. Like we learn technology when we actually have it in hands. And it's also responding to Mpho's idea about the sort of mass production of the Lesiba. We'll understand the Lesiba when we have a Lesiba in every child's hand. Cara, I don't know, where do you think this...
Well, I was just going to say something drawing on what Elijah said, because I think obviously that's what we all want, is many more of these instruments in lots of spaces. But I think just in terms of creativity as well, if we can hear the instruments and we can see them and they're in different spaces and different platforms, we're also getting a huge amount of diverse contexts and kind of creative spaces in which the instruments exist. So if you think about how many spaces a piano exists in terms of this person has this kind of compositional approach to the piano, this person, this is this large ensemble with this in and it sounds like this is a very small solo thing. Like, I just get excited when I think of the potential of all of these different composers and music makers having these instruments, those technologies in hand. There are other technologies facilitating everybody else hearing them, and it's just it could be a really incredible amount of voices, different kinds of creative voices that excites me. Should that ever? I think we're seeing a little bit of that, but it would be nice if it was just a lot broader,
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, we are hopefully kind of hitting that trajectory, and of course, that'll also hopefully come with more support for it as well, and the more we know as well, the more we expose to, as Elijah said, the more that world will grow. And I think it's very important not to keep technologies in the museum, but actually to have them out on the stage. This isn't a lost history, this is a very living history. And I think maybe that's the thing that technology, or thinking about technology in this context, really tells us. It's always kind of living, it's always kind of moving, it's always serving some kind of purpose, and hopefully we kind of see a lot more of that. But I think that's basically our time. So I want to thank our panelists, from Elijah, Thandeka, Sibusiso, Cara, and Mpho. It's been lovely speaking to you. Again, this is the Indigenous Music Technologies Working Group, funded by the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences. And we just want to say a big thanks to them as well for their continued support of our work. And thanks to you all sitting and participating in the Bode Electrons Conference Symposium, and also to Theo Hubs for organizing this. It's been a delight participating this year again, and I hope that you'll be hearing more from us in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
William, hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine, Theo.
Great. I'm just waiting for, there we go. We're both same sized here. You started off our conversation last year during Bode Electrons by suggesting that you felt an intruder. I'd like to return the compliment. This year I feel like the intruder. So I then capped that last year by saying, no, you're a central part of whatever is going on technologically speaking in South Africa. And I'd like to reiterate that point. So a big word of thanks and also congratulations for the work that you're doing down in Rhodes. I don't see any questions in the chat popping up yet. Would you mind terribly if I just put one or two to you?
Go for it.
Great. So the event, the forming of this contribution that we just saw took place during what event exactly? What was going down?
If I remember correctly, it was about a month ago, and as months go these days, they tend to be quite compounded. But it was the third out of 4 workshops that we hosted at ILAM here at Rhodes University. And we, basically as part of that workshop, we had quite a focused weekend working on student kind of projects around indigenous music technologies and so on. And then we did some work consolidating some of our prior research on this project, looking at an upcoming book projects, sort of multimedia project. And then we sort of thought, well, this is a really good time to actually sit down and have a chat about where we stand in this project. So this was workshop 3 out of 4. We subsequently had another workshop which involved Dane Brown, who's a machine learning specialist here at the University of Rhodes University, and we've spoken about ways of codifying indigenous knowledge. So this discussion that you see here was at a moment where we were really thinking about the sort of practicalities around what indigenous music technologies might be, what they might mean for performers, sound engineers, and so on. So this was, about a month ago, but much has happened since. I'm happy to report. But I'll circle back also just briefly to the point that you made about being an intruder here. I think perhaps none of us are intruders anymore. Perhaps we are all technologists, to steal a phrase that's been bandied around music theorists and ethnomusicologists and so on. But maybe we're all music technologists now. So.
Indeed. In the work that you're doing, have you explored at all similar work that had been done earlier in, for example, Eastern Europe? I mean, this tradition, or there is, in my opinion, a tradition of applying technology to indigenous music research, also in specifically in Eastern Europe. Does that feature at all or resonate at all with you?
Yeah, I mean, part of our first workshop was speaking a lot about the sort of historical trajectories around the sort of intersections between indigenous music technologies and perhaps, for lack of a better word, Western music technologies. And of course, we were thinking along the lines of, I'm not sure if this is the example that you thinking about, but early ethnomusicologists and their wax cylinders, and so on. And of course, a lot of that work being done sort of on communities in Eastern Europe or further away into Asia and so on. And we really did think about, what were some of the things that were going unsaid at that moment in history? Was there the space to think about oud on the same level as the wax cylinder, the same epistemological level? Could we conceive of these two technologies as operating in the same kind of layer of musical creation or reproduction, perhaps? And I mean, in the South African case, we sort of saw that the early 20th century, or during the earlier 20th century, and especially with the work of Hugh Tracy at ILAM, these two things were not always seen in the same light. The sort of track rigged up with all the recording equipment going across Southern Africa up into Central Africa and parts of East and West Africa was not always seen as operating in the same kind of ontological framework as the instruments that were being recorded. Yeah. And often what was sort of thought was that the recording technologies were sort of modern and at the cusp of innovation and all this type of stuff, and the technologies being recorded were kind of frozen in time, frozen in a process of development. And so we see a kind of snapshot of them that has remained the same for hundreds of years. And of course, we know that that's not the case. And this was where this idea came from, about speaking about these instruments as kind of continuous organs of innovation. Thinking about something as simple as a tuning peg on a uhadi, and how that's not an uncommon innovation in traditional instruments, right? That's but one innovation in a line of innovations, even going from kind of gut strings to metallic wires, to ways of cutting the calabash, to securing the calabash to the uhadi's stick. All these types of things, they've continually been happening. And also the interesting question to us becomes, where what happens when we put these two things on the same playing field. And Theo, I think you were instrumental in sparking this idea, because of course you have always treated sound in a very kind of democratic way. Sounds are sounds are sounds. So immediately you do away with that kind of colonial partitioning, really. And you sort of say, well, skin has a certain kind of timbre, kind of hide has a certain kind of timbre, or the calabash produces a certain kind of overtone spectrum. And our digital audio workstations, or whatever medium we're working on, should be responsive to these. And if they aren't, then I'm going to kind of make them be responsive.
Right.
And so that's really where this idea comes from, is sort of backtracking on some of those quite artificial divides in discussions around the development of technology. Yeah. Wonderful,
wonderful, wonderful stuff. We've unfortunately run out of time. We can continue this discussion virtually indefinitely. It's a standing invitation, however. Please do be back. Thank you so much, William.
We'll certainly do that. Thank you for having us, Thea, and thanks for the great.
Bye.
Bye.